King's Kids. We are on lesson number 3 of our miracles of the Old Testament. And then, just in case you haven't been watching, remember that we talk about a miracle is something that only God can do. It's a supernatural event because it's not something we can do in the natural world that we live in. It's a supernatural, it's a heavenly thing. Only God can do miracles. Well, today we're going to talk about 2 supernatural events that happen in our story. And today our lesson is called the Pillar of Salt. So in Genesis chapters 18 and 19, we read about the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah and how horrible the sin that was going on in those 2 cities. It was just absolutely everything that could be done against God was being done in those 2 cities, and God had enough. He said, I am going to destroy these 2 cities because of all the sin that's going on there and the absolute lack of God that's in this city. I'm destroying these 2 cities. He was telling Abraham this. Well, Abraham had a nephew whose name was Lot. And Lot had moved to be close to that city and then had eventually wound up living in one of those cities. So Abraham starts to kind of bargain with God or try to make a deal with God, and he says, well, if there's 50 righteous people, would you save the cities and not completely destroy the cities? And God's like, yeah, if there's 50, I'll save the city. Well, there wasn't 50. And so Abraham got all the way down, 45, 40, 30, 20, 10. God, if there's 10 righteous people in the cities, would you spare those cities because of those 10 righteous people? And God said, yeah, if there was 10 righteous people. But guess what? In those 2 cities combined, there was not even 10 righteous people living in those cities. So God said, that's it. I'm destroying Sodom and Gomorrah. There's too much sin going on. Everything that is opposite of God is going on in those cities. And I'm done. I'm not having it. I'm destroying it. There's no righteous people there. Go tell Lot to get his family out. The cities are going to be destroyed. So Abraham goes and he tells Lot, he said, look, God is going to destroy these 2 cities. You have got to get your family and get out. Well, Lot went to his son-in-laws. His first 2 daughters were married to men that lived in the city there too. And he went to them and they laughed at him. They did not believe that God was really going to destroy 2 cities because of all the sin that was going on in those cities. They didn't believe him. So his 2 daughters and their husbands, those 4 people now, were too involved in things of the city. They didn't believe Lot. They laughed at him, and so they didn't go with him. So the next morning, angels come and they say, Lot, you have to take your wife and the 2 daughters that you have that aren't married and get out. And Lot was still hanging around the city. Probably partly because he knew it was his fault. He led his family that direction, and now 2 of his daughters, who were also married to 2 guys from the city, so those 4 people that were part of Lot's family, he knew they were going to be destroyed, and he's hanging around the cities. Finally, the angels took Lot and his wife and the 2 daughters by hand and led them out of the city. And Lot, I'm sure, is realizing by this time some of the bad choices he made by taking his family to those cities. Because in the beginning, Lot was given the choice of where to go, and he just kind of made his little area to where it overlooked those cities. And just time goes by, he gets closer and closer and ends up moving into the cities. Him and his family get involved in the things that are going on in the city, and he's not able to keep his whole family focused on God. They're way too worldly. They're used to the things in the world. They like that. They are finding pleasure in sin. The Bible says there is pleasure in sin for a while. It doesn't last. So he knew that it was his decisions, his bad choices that had led his family to where they were, and that 4 of them were going to be destroyed. That he knew for sure because they laughed at him and they wouldn't go with him. So the angels led them out of the city, and he told them, do not look back. Get out of the city. They led them out of the city, told them to keep going, because God was going to rain down fire and brimstone from heaven and come burn up Sodom and Gomorrah, both of those cities. Nothing left. Completely everything, animals, houses, people, it didn't matter. Everything in those 2 cities were burnt up to where there was nothing left but ashes. Just ashes. The entire cities, everything in the city was burnt up. Number one, that's one miracle right there, because fire raining down from heaven, like if it was raining but it was fire coming down instead of raindrops, that's not natural, right? And we've talked about how miracles are the supernatural. That's where God steps in. We can't make fire rain down from heaven, but God can. So that's a not natural event, a fire raining down from heaven, not natural. But because God stepped in and he worked the supernatural, he did a miracle and made fire rain down out of the sky to burn up those 2 cities. Now remember, while they were fleeing, the angel told them not to look back. Well, Lot's wife turns around and looks back and instantly becomes a pillar of salt. Now that's another miracle, because people don't just turn into pillars of salt or pillars of stone or any kind of pillar. You don't just turn into a pillar, right? Well, again, a miracle, a supernatural event, something that only God could cause. He allowed her to be turned into a pillar of salt because she did not follow the directions. The angels told them, do not look back. She looked back. So she turns into a pillar of salt. Now, for any of you parents that happen to be watching today, I'll make this quick. This is a lot about you. Fathers are to lead their children toward God and toward the things of Jesus. And even though his older 2 daughters were married, and they're making their own decisions and stuff, yes, it was their fault. They made the decision to not believe him and not leave and not go with him. But it was because of where he had led them to. All of it started with Lot. Now, kids, as you get older, you have to make the decision yourself. It doesn't matter if your mom and dad aren't living for Jesus. You're going to get to an age where it's not going to matter. You're going to have to make that decision for yourself, even if mom and dad aren't living for Jesus. But moms and dads, let me talk to you for just a second and remind you that it's actually your responsibility to lead your kids toward Jesus. And if we are doing things that we're leading them toward God, they'll make better choices. But if we're leading them away from God and we're getting involved in the worldly stuff ourselves, then we're not being the example to our kids that we need to be. So even though his kids were grown, they were married, they were making their own decisions, a lot of it came back to the fact that at first, Lot just made his tents and his area look at the cities. And then it just gradually, they ended up to where they ended up living right in the middle of these sinful cities. So a lot of it came right back to the fact that Lot, the dad, the father, was not leading his kids in the right direction. He didn't try to keep them away from the sin. He led them right into it, and they made their houses and stuff right in the cities of sin. So parents, it's very, very important that while your kids are young, you are teaching them the things of God and you're leading them toward God. Because then the Bible says if you train up a child in the way he should go, when he's old, he won't depart from it. Now, does that mean every kid is going to be saved if their parents are? No. But that does give us the promise that if we will raise our kids right and we will train them right and we will teach them the things of God, we have a lot better shot that when they do grow up and they become adults, they're going to remember these things, and they're going to remember that mom and dad lived it, grandma and grandpa lived it, and so I need to live it. And that you'll have a better chance of them, if they do go away from God, coming back because you've led that life. If you're not leading that life, they're not going to come back to the life of that Jesus wants with them either. Not saying all the time, but for the most part, you've got that promise that if you lead them the right way, they'll eventually come back to the right way if they stray away. Now, we can talk about a couple of things with Lot's wife. Why did she look back? I mean, the angel said, do not look back. And she looks back. So why did she look back? Well, a couple things. One, she probably felt responsible because God is in charge and he's put the father to be over the family and then the mother to be under the father, and the mother is supposed to take care of the kids. So if you picture a big umbrella and you've got God at the top, and then you've got another umbrella below that, which is the father, the dad, and then you have another umbrella below that's the mom, and then another umbrella below that is the kids. There's a level of protection on those kids if everybody's doing what they're supposed to be doing. Now, if the dad's not, but the mom is, it's still that mom's responsibility to take care of those kids. So she may have been turning back because she felt responsible because she knew the other two daughters, her daughters, were going to be destroyed or were being destroyed. Maybe she didn't look back till after the fire started coming down and she just, panicked because she's like, oh, two of my girls are still there, and look back. But part of it was probably because she had gotten too close to the things of the world and she wasn't living the way she should either, and she was having those pleasures in that sin. Remember, there's pleasures in sin, but only for a season. It doesn't last forever. And so she probably had gotten too close to the world herself. Again, partly because the father was not leading the family to Jesus, so the mother's not following Jesus, so the kids aren't following Jesus. Now, of course, that does not give you an excuse if you have a husband or don't have a husband. There's no leader. Then your leader then becomes your pastor in God. So you still have no excuse even if the man, the dad in the life, is not living for Jesus. That doesn't give the mom the excuse to not live for Jesus. She still needs to be responsible for those kids. So I know this lesson's kind of gone between parents and kids, but it's all together. I mean, the parents are responsible for the kids. So for the kids to do right, the parents got to do right. So it's really hard to cover this story without talking to the parents a little bit too, so I hope you don't mind. But kids, even if mom and dad are not living for Jesus, you have to make up in your mind that you are going to live for Jesus no matter what. You're going to do it no matter if your mom does, dad does, neither one of them do, it doesn't matter. Because sin is fun, but only for a season. The end of that is death. And so you want to make sure that you have your heart right and you're ready to go to heaven no matter who else in your family does or doesn't serve Jesus. It doesn't matter. You've got to make up your own decision. Your own life has to be given to God, not whether mom and dad do or not. So fire from heaven, fire and brimstone raining down out of heaven, that's not natural. People turning into pillars of salt, that's not natural. So these were two kind of bad events, but they were still supernatural events. They were miracles. They were things that happened because God had to step in and do something about them. Now, we've talked about how there's consequences. It was supernatural that God stepped in and she turned to a pillar of salt and that fire was raining out of heaven. But God stepped in because those were consequences for their sin. Now, we know that we've talked about the consequences for our sin is supposed to be death, but that Jesus came and gave us a way to have salvation. God steps in so that you don't have to have those consequences. But if you don't turn your life over to Him, there will be consequences. We've talked about how, and we're going to in the next few weeks, about how our world is going to be destroyed by fire. We're going to talk about that a little bit. But if you follow Acts 2:38, then you know you're going to live and you're not going to be here when the earth as we know it and the heavens as we know it, when everything is burned up by fire, because that was another promise in His Word. You won't be here when that happens if you've followed Acts 2:38 and done what you're supposed to. And then my last point for today is in Luke chapter 17, verse 32. Jesus' words, and the kids know we've talked about it. Whenever it's in red, it means Jesus said it while He was on this earth. And it says, remember Lot's wife. Now, why do you think Jesus in the New Testament talking to the disciples and, you know, all the people around that day, why would he say, remember Lot's wife? Well, because in this passage, he's talking about people who get ready for heaven, they do what they're supposed to, they're living for Jesus, but then they turn back and they go back to being that old person that they used to be, the person that was not saved, not living for Jesus. They go back to being that person again. And the Bible says, if you do that, you're not fit for the kingdom. So if you are living for Jesus and then you just decide, yep, nope, not doing that no more, and you turn back to that person you used to be, then you're not ready for heaven, and you won't be ready for heaven when Jesus comes back. And so, remember Lot's wife means remember not to go back. Don't look back to the things of the world. Don't look back to the things that I've brought you from. Don't look back to your past and start doing those things again. Keep your eyes going forward. Look ahead. Look toward Jesus. Do the things that Jesus has asked us to do. And then you will be ready. And you'll go to heaven and live with him and not be on the earth when it gets burned up by fire. If you want to know more about the earth being burned up by fire, you should be watching on Wednesday nights. Because we're working on that a little bit throughout the weeks on Wednesday night. We're doing little illustrations. We're doing short talks. But we're talking about how the earth, just like those two cities, Sodom and Gomorrah, were completely destroyed because of all the sin. The Bible says the same things that they were doing back in Noah's day. Remember that? They were eating, drinking, marrying. They were having a great old time back in Noah's day, and he sent the flood. And he said, I won't destroy the earth with a flood again, but he did make the promise that he will destroy it by fire. But in order for you to not be on the earth when it gets burned up like Sodom and Gomorrah, then you have to follow Acts 2:38 and be living for Jesus and live a holy life. So, like I said, keep watching on Wednesday nights. We're covering that topic a little bit more. But remember Lot's wife. Don't turn your heart over to Jesus and then look back and go back to the way you used to be. Don't allow God to have that supernatural of raining down fire, burning up the earth. You don't want to experience that. You don't want to be on earth when that happens, just like they shouldn't have been in Sodom and Gomorrah when that happened. But because of all the sin and all the nastiness that was going on in Sodom and Gomorrah, God said there's not even 10 righteous people there. So I'm going to destroy those two cities. And Lot only makes it out with him and his two daughters that weren't married. So 3 people. We started with Lot, his wife, his 2 daughters that weren't married, his 2 daughters that were married, and their husbands. 8 people. There was not even 10 righteous people in the city. And then from those 8, not even those 8 made it. The 2 husbands and wives that were married did not make it. And then Lot's wife turned around. So only 3 people out of 8 even made it out of the city. And that is because the angel came and took them anyway. And those 3 did not turn around. They followed the directions at that point and did not turn around. But we can't get close to the things of the world. We can't do the worldly things. And once we've turned our life over to Jesus and we've let him take control and we're living for him, it's remember Lot's wife, because you cannot turn back and go back to the way you used to be. You've got to keep going ahead and living and working for Jesus. So keep listening to our videos. We're going through miracles of the Old Testament and talking about how miracles are a supernatural event that God steps in and does, and not a natural thing that we can do. So keep listening, and I will see you the next time.